Welcome to the You Matter podcast.
So welcome everybody. I have Don Young here with me. He used to work in the pharmaceutical industry. He was a marketing executive at one time, but he found himself growing a little discontent in that line of work. And after he was living the American dream, but after so much success in material wealth, he found that his discontentment was continuing to grow. And at which time I think that led him into some sort of a spiritual awakening. And that awakening has spurred him to open up to many things. He's written a book that's yet to be published, but it will be out soon enough. It's called Finding God in Vegas. And what's the subtitle of that, Don?
It's called, Finding God in Vegas, Reimagining the American Dream.
Reimagining the American Dream. I really look forward to this book coming out. I definitely want to read your copy of that. So Don has a very interesting background outside of his pharmaceutical foray and career that he went off on. He also has a Bachelor of Arts in history, in religion, and in philosophy, and he's got a Master of Arts in theology. So it's quite a lineup of education. I've got some really philosophical questions to ask you here this evening, and of course I want to talk about this memoir that you have written. I am deeply curious about that. So I want to start out by talking a little bit about faith. You know, it seems that there's a bit of a decline in faith in the world right now. And I feel faith is so important because it's sort of our entry point into our relationship with the divine. For me, faith opens the door. And, you know, when life runs out of logic and meaning, it's faith that ties a line on, and it lowers us into the depths of our soul, helping us to hear things that we may not hear in our mind, but hear things that rise up in the soul, to maybe hear things that the divine has for us. So with faith, we start to find new direction, and it certainly helped me find a different direction in life. Back when I didn't have faith, you know, I thought I was it. And the problem with that is that if we all think we're it, it's the ego, it's the mind running our show. And we tend to be drawing from a very small and limited cup. Whereas with faith, when it draws us deep into the silence of the soul, what lies within us, we start to draw from a much larger cup. So that was quite a bit. Don, I'm really fascinated to hear, what is faith to you, and why do you think it's important? Why so?
You have a wonderful question to start the podcast off with, so thank you. You know, when I had my spiritual awakening, you know, one of the things that I kind of realized was that we all have faith in something. Like, whether or not we acknowledge it, we have faith in something. It's what motivates us to get out of bed each day. It's to continue through life, to go through the struggles and challenges that we do. But even when I hear people who are atheists or something like that, and say, well, I don't have any faith, I'm like, well, yeah, you have faith in something, because faith is what kind of propels us to act in the world, to do what we do. Otherwise, we just kind of give up and go away. And fortunately, that's not how we're designed as creatures. And I think it's because we do have a divine purpose here with things. I love when you talk about faith as something that is both inside us, but also something that I guess reattaches us or connects us with the larger community. And I don't think that faith, at least in my experience, has been it's just about me. Faith then, like, you maybe come into that focal point, but what faith does for me is open up the whole world to you in terms of a community and a connectedness to one another. And it's by having those connections, like having conversations like this, that I believe is what connects us with one another. And that's also what connects us with the divine. I see, because I see the divine throughout the world, in the world that we live in, and in the people that inhabit the world, and the plants and the animals and all that stuff as well. So, I love how you kind of talk about that, because I do believe it is that, like, you kind of go inward and then you go outward with it. And for me, faith has been that transformative that people have seen through my actions, behavior, words, things like that, how faith has affected me. And because of how it's affected me, it affects my actions throughout the world and my, interactions with other people as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think, when I was looking through some of your material online, I could see you've gone through a major transition. You've changed jobs. It looks like you've had many leaps of faith in your recent times here.
Yes.
And it's not easy. Having faith that life will work out for us sometimes is tricky, let alone having faith in the divine, or having faith, in humanity, or.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that, to your point on, I kind of went through this significant spiritual awakening that just kind of shifted my whole worldview and everything. But to your point, it's never a one and done thing. At least that's been my experience, especially as I've kind of journeyed out and have said to myself, I cannot go back to pharmaceutical marketing. I have to find something else in terms of to earn the daily bread, so to speak. But my actions also need to be tied to who I want to be and who I believe I'm supposed to be. And that is a creature who both gives and receives love with things. So, I can tell you that I have my moments of doubt with regard to faith all the time, but it always leads me in the right direction. Even when I have those moments of doubt, there's like something I'll get in terms of, I don't know, a message, a sign from the universe, from God, whatever you want to call it, that I'm like, no, this is the right path I'm supposed to be on. And I can see it until I have my next moment of doubt.
Well, in the bio you sent me, that you said after your awakening, you learned you had to surrender to God, and you surrendered to love. When I read that, I was just thrilled. I thought that what a beautiful statement.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, for me, the whole point of the spiritual awakening was I think surrender was, exactly the word. It just, I humbled my heart. I opened myself up. I realized that I'm okay with who I am. I don't need to chase or be anything else. We're all imperfect creatures. That's kind of what also makes us unique as well, with things. So, yeah. Yeah.
So another topic I want to sort of open up and kind of see what your thoughts are is devotion. And, after faith, I think it's important to, like, for me, my devotion is a really important topic. And when I think of devotion, I think it's sort of dedication with like a superpower added to it. And that devotion is dedication with love. And it makes our when we're devoted to our faith, when we're devoted to whoever shows up in our day, like not just our faith, but when we're a devoted person to our life, whoever comes into our lives that day, if we're devoted, we're showing up with love. We're dedicated to answer whatever comes to our door with the inclusion of love. Being devoted and having faith together, I think, pairs and brings us into a much deeper place in ourselves. It deepens our relationships with other people as well. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes right back to kind of what you talked about, is that faith, then that leads to that devotion. But again, that's what opens me up to the rest of the world. So I'll give you an example of kind of what I mean by it, is that when I go out in public now, most of the time, old Don was like, head down, do what you need to do, get in, get out, whatever with things. And it's not that I still don't like efficiency. I do like that. But I also take time to like acknowledge people, to say, hello, thank you, or, just smile at people, acknowledge their presence, because we are all divine gifts. So why wouldn't I acknowledge the divine that's, within other people as well? And so when you talk about devotion, if love is so central to, which for me it is, in terms of the ethic, in terms of how I live my life, then it has to show up in everything that I do, and in the everyday. And there'll be times where I'll be having a bad day. I'm not a very patient driver, I'll say that. And so I'll get really kind of frustrated, and I just have to take a breath and say, Don, you don't know what's going on with that person. It's really, in the scheme of things, this is not important at all. You'll get to where you need to go in terms of your destination, both literally and figuratively, with things. But yeah, I mean, if for me, faith has to be real. It has to live in our actions, and it has to live within our words. And it's not something that's just about me. It starts with me, but then it goes out from me as well, which I think is very much how I think of God.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and like when it comes to faith and devotion, it reminds me of a quote by Thomas Troward. I don't know if you've read any of Thomas's work, but he was a writer from the early 1900s, and sort of part of that New Thought movement that happened way back then. So he said in his book, The Creative Process in the Individual, he said, if we approach the ocean with only a small cup and leave with a small cup of water, we cannot say that the ocean wasn't bountiful, or the ocean didn't give all it had to us. What we need to do is approach the ocean with a bigger cup. And I think that's sort of my thing about faith is in devotion is I need to constantly approach that with a bigger cup. How much more of that can I apply to my life?
yeah.
And I just think his quote kind of beautifully illustrates that.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful quote. I mean, in some ways, especially if you think of the ocean in terms of the love that surrounds us, maybe we shouldn't even be thinking about cups. Maybe we need to be immersing ourselves in that.
Yeah.
With things. But yeah, that's great. Yeah. Yeah.
The last line of that quote is, or maybe throw our cup into the ocean and let it be perpetually fulfilled. So you're right on line with Thomas Troward in your thinking.
One of the things that was also part of my spiritual awakening was we think we need to figure so much out on our own, when we never realize that there's been billions of people that have come before us who have this wonderful experience and wisdom to partake on us. And, a lot of times I very much value the past, because there is something that's always learned from it. We're not the first humans to kind of go through what we're going through in terms of trying to understand or connect with our spirituality. And so the fact that, just this conversation alone just kind of showed how wonderful that connection is with a writer I didn't even know, but you're well versed in, that kind of was sharing a similar message, with things. So I don't know. I think that's really cool stuff.
Yeah, and I love reading some of the old writers. I find their messages sometimes you have to sort of think on them for a few minutes. There's a lot of intention there. So
Yeah.
I want to throw this talk we're having into the deep end and go in a little bit different direction.
Sure.
So I want to talk about, and I want to get to your memoir. We're going to get to that yet, because I do have some questions about that. But I want to talk about God's will. So your roots in theology, does God have will? What are your thoughts on that? Because I have my own ideas, but I want to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, I'm going to ask a question with the question. What do you mean by will?
It's a plan.
Okay.
I like your question because my next one's going to feed into what you're asking me. Actually.
Okay. I do know that God has purpose. I think that there's truth and beauty and love, and I think that is all purposeful. I don't even begin to kind of understand it all, or we'll say I do, but I do believe that God seeks to be united with all of creation, and with the love that is created. So, I mean, that's kind of, I don't know, the thoughts right now.
Sure, yeah, because sometimes the older Christian script was that God wants this, or God wants that, and I don't see God as a wanting God. Like in the Lord's Prayer, it says, "Thy will be done." Why would God want anything for me? But I do think that God's will, from my perspective, lives deep in my soul. And if I'm quiet enough, and I can settle myself enough to get out of my egoic mind and to ask what is God's will for me, that God's will rises up out of my soul, and it's sort of what I think is our purpose. Mm-hmm. And everybody has their own unique purpose, and your purpose, and I've never read this anywhere, but it's sort of my idea is that God's will is the purpose that lies within our soul. Mm-hmm. And so if we learn to be quiet enough to listen intently to ourselves, to that depth of being that not everybody gets to, we start to hear that guidance sort of comes up in us, and that's God's individual will for all of us, for each of us.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm, very clear at this point that purpose is about creating love in the world. Like, that for me is, I don't know how it will play out very differently for every single person. We in terms of what that looks like, but I absolutely believe that core to our purpose is to create more love in the world. And when people say, okay, well, what do you mean by creating love in the world? I mean, like, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, like being a good neighbor, the great commandment, if you come from, the Christian tradition. But that I absolutely believe is our purpose, is to love one another and to take care of this planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I started a campaign a very long time ago. It was called Be Love. And we did a fundraiser. It initially started with a fundraiser, and that Be Love first fundraiser, we raised nearly $80,000 and gave that to mental health in our area. But the slogan was be loving to the world, be loving to other people, most importantly, be loving to yourself. And I feel we tattooed the letter B with a heart. So it is sort of a very quick, easy tattoo to do. And it's a symbol of instructions for life.
Yeah. 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 And I love the fact that you talked about, loving the world, loving other people, but also loving yourself. And I never use that in a narcissistic, selfish way. But I'll tell you, one of the things I've definitely learned from my spiritual awakening is the fact that you got to start with yourself. You got to start with your own yard, so to speak, and be okay with who you are. Love your imperfections. Know that you're enough. Don't let anyone kind of push shame in your life for something you can't change about yourself or whatever. With things, but yeah, that's all important. I mean, you really, it does kind of start at home, before you save the world, so to speak.
Yeah. I've spent a lot of time looking at love, and the last interview I did with a gentleman, he was from Australia and he's a doctor there, and he created a project, or the listening project, and he did his thesis on listening. And we talked about love a little bit in that interview. And it's such an important topic to my life. I've sort of dedicated my life to learning about what is love. And it's something that my mind I don't think will ever really understand. But in one of my books, I talked about, it has nothing to do with our humanness because it's divine, but it has everything to do with our humanness because it's the fabric, it's the weave that holds all of this together. Yeah. It's the weave is to cloth. It's love is to cloth as the weave. It's what holds it all together.
Yeah. No, I think that is a great analogy. I think just the very, act of creation is an act of love. Like how we even start into this world is an act of love with things. So I think that's a nice way to look at it.
And I think it also lowers us deeper into the truth of who and what we are. It helps us understand our what we are, why we're here, and because it's the truth of our Creator is just imbued with love.
Yeah. And to your point, I think I know for myself, I can't even begin to really process or understand that idea of love, like that so much love, the love that keeps giving, even when our ego selves would be like, I've had enough, or, there's only a limit to the amount of love we can give. So yeah, I don't even think we can completely even understand what it all means.
Like even the descriptions of love in Corinthians, I think it is, love is patient, love is kind. Right. That sort of fails to even come close to pointing to what love is, because it's comparing it to an opposite. And love is beyond opposites, it's beyond duality. So it's infinite in nature. So to even compare it to an opposite just maybe is a speck of the way to understanding the depth of it. So I think it's one of those things where it's good to contemplate on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, and to your, I think there's just the idea of the divine, of love, like it's so it's not something I can completely even wrap my head around. But that's why I think it's important that and good that people use different language, different metaphors, different analogies to kind of talk about what that means in the world. And the Bible is definitely full of different ways of talking about the divine, for sure.
Absolutely. So your memoir, tell us a little bit about that. What is it? What is it all about?
Sure. Well, I mean, the short story would be it's about this guy's spiritual awakening. But I think this guy's spiritual awakening is not uncommon with the experience that a lot of people have. I wrapped so much of who I am in my career about, who I was. So when I lost my job in my 50s, I was like, well, what do? I don't know who I am anymore with things. So there was that piece to it. The fact of like, we moved across. So after I lost the job, we moved across the country. Then we had a beloved pet that died. I embraced kind of the whole American dream, pursuing, everything that I could, trying to keep up with the Kardashians or whomever I needed to keep up with on things. So that was kind of like my adult life. And all I did was chase and run and go after stuff, none of the stuff that would ever make me happy. And so I was a pretty unhappy person. And then kind of through a series of events, the job loss being one, losing a pet was another one, going through COVID and the pandemic was another one where I just started to question everything. It probably didn't help that I, started to like, I watched Dope Sick or Crime of the Century and then was like, wow, I spent my whole life in pharmaceutical marketing. And one of our clients was Purdue Pharma, who was very responsible for a lot of the opioid epidemic in this country and throughout the world. And they were my clients. And I'm just thinking, I have spent my whole adult life adding no value to the world whatsoever. At least that was my point of view and opinion. It's not a judgment of anyone else with what they do. But, when I look at a teacher or a firefighter or a doctor or whatever, like it's very tangible in terms of, what they do. So that's really what it's about. And it's just kind of sharing my experience with other people. And I think it's in a way that's humorous, non-judgmental, relatable, that, people can open up. And more than anything else, I want people to maybe just take a pause and say, where am I in my life? What is my purpose? What am I creating? And I think, especially as one gets older, those topics percolate to the top a bit more than when I was in my 20s.
Mm-hmm. We started this conversation off with talking about faith. And do you think there's a lot of people that feel spiritually empty right now? And is that something you talk about in your memoir?
Yes. There's no doubt to me. I mean, we live in a time, it's a very strange time where we've just pretty much embraced our material side. This idea that we're spiritual creatures, agnostic to any religion or institution, that's a really recent phenomenon in human history. I mean, it didn't matter if you were a shaman or a prophet wandering the desert. This whole idea that we're spiritual and material creatures has been part of the human experience since we started as humans are looking up at the stars. And for some reason I think there's reasons for it, but whatever is, we've kind of reduced ourselves to objects, to consumers, to constituents, to whatever labels we want to use for ourselves. And I think we're reaping a lot of those rewards. Well, not rewards, but I would say the disadvantages of the fact that if we're just material creatures, we're not just material creatures. I believe we are spiritual creatures, But if you don't have any sort of ethical framework, any a sense that you're connected to something more outside of yourself as part of the divine, I think it leads to either trying to keep ahead with other people or a weird sense of self-centered narcissism that I think is very prevalent in our culture in the West. I get off the soapbox.
No, I can relate to what you're saying. The catalyst for my awakening, but also my deepest depression. Actually, it started with my deepest depression. The catalyst for that was by the time I reached 20, I had a house, I had a vacation property, I had a motorcycle, married. I made all the check marks on the life list by 20, and that was very quick to make those check marks. And the promise that I'd be happy was when it didn't show up.
Right.
Society sort of promises that, and it's an empty promise. And I'm glad I got through that list very quickly so I could, really get on with life. I get on with asking myself deeper and more fundamental things, connecting with people and learning what I can from everybody that I meet. And I've had some really good spiritual teachers, read some great books, but I still feel like I'm a student of life, and I want to continuously expand that knowledge. So, if the listeners want to learn a little bit more about you, how can they find you, Don?
So, I'm on the World Wide Web at DonaldHaroldYoung.com, DonaldHarold, Young.com. And there's daily devotions that are posted, blog posts every couple of weeks, and then just kind of other writings that I needed to find a home for, and I thought this is a good home for them.
The old paradigm of business is based on a masculine, out of balance role, and I see a rise of the feminine coming up in that feminine aspects of, because within us are two polarities, and we have both of them. It's not our gender, masculine, the divine masculine, divine feminine. They both live within us, and when they're in balance and they're in harmony with ourselves, then we start to act in a much more harmonious way with each other. Out of balance masculine is dominant and forceful, competitive, sees lack. In balance feminine qualities are abundance. There's enough for everyone. It's overseeing. It's intuitive. It's creation. The movement of creation in us. I started to unpack some of these things in my third last book, and I hope to write a book about the divine masculine and divine feminine, sort of fleshing out, understanding the polarities and how they can actually create a roadmap for us to live our lives through.
Yeah.
Have you thought about any of that, or
Well, I'm definitely not. I'm at a different point in my journey for sure. But I will say that this idea of the masculine and the feminine, like, that's just key to love. Like that's key to love. Like, love is about birth and renewal. And like, to me, it one of the things that, in terms of just kind of my upbringing was when I see institutions of faith, particularly the church, get onto these things about language and, what we should use. And I'm like, but if you just look at kind of how the Bible talks about God, God is God. God encompasses, of course, both the feminine and the masculine. I mean, that's the nature of the divine. So it seems silly when we get into these fights over words and things like that with it. So that's about as far as I've come with it. It's like, I believe that I want my spiritual faith to be about opening and growing, not narrowing it. And I
Yeah.
think we spend too much time, especially religious institutions, trying to narrow it, and I think that does a disservice to love.
Mm-hmm. It certainly, love itself just automatically brings understanding and meaning into everything that we insert it into.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And it is just that simple. I get that too.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it works so well with my clients. If my client is struggling while I'm working, I try to embrace them with love all the time. What I do, I'm tattooing people, so if
right.
I'm coming at them with love and compassion and just a sense of trying to nurture them through the process, it transforms the session. It doesn't mean it's going to be painless, but it's certainly a lot nicer than if I was trying to force my way. And again, I think that's where the old paradigm is a forceful dominant system that says,
Yeah,
I'm right, you're wrong, do it our way. This is how it has to be. Where life is so much bigger than that, and
right.
you know,
Yeah,
reaching into that.
I love your approach. Um, I just yeah, imagine if we did that, like tried to do more of that with everything. You know, it'd be a good thing.
Well, I can't imagine it because that's sort of it sounds like it's your approach and it's also mine. So and that's what I've imagined for my life to be, and that's what it's become. It's
Uh,
certainly
yeah,
one of my purposes as well.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I can tell it shines through it for sure.
Yeah. Is there any concluding thoughts you'd like to share with us, Don?
Um, Concluding thoughts would be just you're a creature of the divine. You know, you're a spiritual creature. You're loved. You're 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 exactly who you need to be. Embrace your imperfections. Um, and the other thing I'd say is, always ask why. Always continue conversations. When we don't ask why, I don't think we grow as people. I don't think we grow in our faith. And I think it also leads to all sorts of tyranny in the world as well. So asking why is it's one of those things that's core to being human. So
Mm. Curiosity. I
curiosity.
actually named that as a virtue in one of my books. I was talking about virtues, and I don't know that it's ever been named as a virtue, but it's a virtue to me. Well, thank you so much for coming on today to share some of your experiences. I love your perspective. I appreciate your approach to life. Understand that you're adding so much value to this world that we live in, and I thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you, Ned, because I see it with the work that you do as well. So thank you.
Take care and goodbye.
Thank you for taking time to listen. Stay tuned for our next episode of the You Matter podcast. Have a wonderful day.